Welcome to the Revenue Blueprint. This is not another sales podcast on tips and tactics. Instead, we focus on unfiltered stories from founders and early stage sales leaders on what it takes to build a successful revenue team. If you get just a little bit of value from this, we ask that you pay it forward by liking, sharing, and subscribing to the podcast. All right, let's get into the episode. Episode of the Revenue Blueprint. I'm joined by my co-host Seth. How's it going, man?
What's up, dude? Oh, it's a pleasure.
We were just chatting a little bit about being confident in your own sales process and what it takes to get to that confidence level where you can walk away from a deal. So you have a pretty good story that kind of encompasses this. So let me hand the mic to you.
Yeah. So the first salesman I ever hired, I'm surprised I didn't mess him up as the first time being a manager, but I think what made me successful in management was I had operational excellence in what I did as a salesperson. I wasn't the best by far, and I'm certainly still learning and still have a lot to learn, but being able to make these processes basically so when I came in from being hungover, I could sit down and knew what I needed to do for the day to get to my quota. So I was very organized. And so when I hired this young man, Nick, I was able to teach him what I had been doing that worked really well. And he was able to take it and run with it. And he was a far better salesman. But I was at his wedding in India and he had his whole sales team there. And so now he's gone on to being a sales manager and he's awesome. And we remained good friends. And I guess he likes me enough to invite me to his wedding. So I guess that worked out. But his whole sales team was there. And I noticed they were like, for lack of a better word, like had a lot of swag. I think the good news, or like swagger. The good news was they were all over quota. I think it was like December 27th. It's actually right before the pandemic. So it was the last big trip. Thank you, Nick, for that. And I'm like, man, these guys, they have a lot of swagger. Like, it's just a confident group of salespeople. Like, what is it? So I started thinking about this. And then I think we were at the bar, probably 2 a.m. as the sales team would at a wedding. And I started asking them, I'm like, what makes you guys so good, right? What makes you girls so good? It was just like an awesome group of people. And what I was able to distill down was that they made decisions. They always operated as if they were over quota, right? And at the beginning of every period, every month, you're under quota. You start at zero, right? That sucks. It's like you're beginning the race all over at zero and like, all right, we got to climb this mountain again. And so you go through these natural cycles of being over quota and under quota. And we find that if we're over quota, we have so much more confidence and swagger, right? There's no desperation. You don't even care if we close this deal because we're already at our accelerators. We're already getting paid. Sure, if you want to close now, great. But if we don't, it goes into next month. I'll close you at the beginning of next month so that I'm already, on my way to getting to quota next month. So there's no like desperation. It's like the opposite of desperation. And so when I was distilling it down of like, how do you actually do this, right? Because people say fake it till you make it, which is a little bit trite and kind of cheesy and makes you sound like a liar. But it's like, how do you have this confidence to, as you said, walk away from a deal and operate in a way that people want to buy from you? And so tactically, what they were saying was they kind of believed they were always over quota and they made decisions as if they were always over quota. So, if you're under quota and you're kind of like, got to get to quota, you start to make some kind of reckless or discounting or desperate moves. They said, what would 100% to quota do? What would I do if I was over quota right now? And I'm going to make that decision. I'm going to operate like that all the time. So quota becomes like kind of this irrelevant number that you're going to get to. And you're already over quota when you start the month. Gives you like this swagger and confidence that people buy from, right? It's those people that make the best reps. And so I know this is really hard to do. It's the hardest thing in sales to do, to act like you're over quota if you're under quota, but deliberately thinking at each decision that you need to make on a deal, well, what would I do in this case if I was over quota, right?
I think that speaks to some principles are well known around identity, and you behave in the way that you believe. And if you believe that you're over quota or you believe you're a top salesperson, you're going to do the things that a top salesperson will do and you're going to act in that way, right? And I've told a lot of reps this over time is, hey, you're struggling to figure out how to approach your day. Just ask yourself, if I was the best salesperson on the team, what would I be doing right now? It's a great frame reset to think through how you should probably approach a lot of situations. And if it sounds like they were able to build kind of that culture across their entire sales team, then you don't operate from a place from fear. Everyone's seen what happens to a pipeline when it's dry and desperate, right? You take bad calls, you promise features you don't have, and it's this waterfall effect that's typically bad for everyone involved, including the customer. So I'm curious though, particularly with this group of folks, how did they get that mindset to perpetuate throughout the team and stick around? Because it's great to talk about. It makes lots of sense on paper, but sustaining that is really difficult.
I don't know the answer. I can only say that Nick was the best, if not one of the best people that I've ever worked with. He far eclipsed my skills quite quickly, and I think he knows this now, but I managed him not how I did things. I mean, much of what I had done, but how he should do things. So I was trying to build the perfect rep, and he didn't know enough to know that I wasn't actually doing all these things. I was a bit of a hypocrite in this management, but I was able to build the perfect rep. And I know his standards and his patience he demands excellence and has little patience for anything that would be desperate or sloppy. And so his mindset was probably, to answer your question, I assume was being managed into these reps of, no, you don't do that. You operate as if it wasn't, he didn't say, I imagine he didn't say, operate like you're over quota. It was, this is just the way you do things all the time. You're under a quota or over quota. We just don't do that.
The bar doesn't move
The
based
standard
on
is the standard.
right. How much effort you put into different parts of the process or your prospecting, wherever that can change, right? But the standard is always the standard.
And so, and maybe some of it was probably taught for me. I'll tell another story that's kind of even is more ridiculous and kind of funny, but kind of gets to the basics of this. I was at another sales rep. He'll remain nameless, but he also a good friend. I've been to his wedding too. He was at the wedding in India, also a great dude, but he was just getting started in his career. And I think we had this standard in our office that, you got to operate kind of making best decisions all the time. I was never as deliberate as kind of Nick was in doing this, but this was kind of the standard. And this young man had a prospect that just treated him horribly and always dangled out the chance that he would buy from him someday. So whenever the chips were down or whenever he was under quota or whenever, the end of the month, he would call this prospect and kind of beg, right? The opposite of what we're talking about. He
Right.
would call and be like, hey, so, is now the time? And it was like, you could just sense the desperation in his voice. And he was begging for the deal. And the prospect just treated him horribly. I didn't hear the call, but it sounded just like abuse. And it was probably such a power trip for the prospect. And I was not always politically correct in my management style, but he put the phone down, and we had an open sales room with everybody around. And I turned around and I said, if you call that prospect one more time, I'm gonna fucking fire you. And I was like, this is not who we are. As a team, we don't make that call. We don't take abuse. We are not desperate. That is a cancer that infects everyone here. I was like, I will literally fire you if you call that person again. I think before that I had said, yeah, let them go. That's not a prospect. Close loss. Don't call them. They're not going to close. This is not a good use of your time. It erodes your confidence. It's not what you would do if you were over quota. And so I just lost my mind on this act of desperation that, everyone kind of looks around at each other like, is he really calling them again? Are we doing that? Is this who we are as a team? So I think it also, it's a team-wide thing of almost competing to be excellent, competing to be what the best rep would do, almost showing off what greatness looks like as a standard that everyone would do that. And no one would ever make that call because that's a very embarrassing call to make, to be on a team of someone who would make that call. I mean, that's why I made that point quite emphatically, to be like, that will not be tolerated. We're not doing that here.
This was in front of the rest of the sales team.
Yeah, a very open culture where it was radical candor, maybe too open at times, but it was very, I'd say also like a family, loving. I mean, it was in person, so we're going to go down that road, but we're just the same group that we'd party all night celebrating and be brutally hungover, and we all could have stayed home, but we all preferred to come into the office and be together. And there was no judgment if you didn't. Some people just could get off the couch, but we wanted to be there together. So it was very supportive. We wanted to win as a team, but we also there's certainly things that could be improved. This was not a utopian environment, but a lot of constructive criticism, support, coaching,
right?
But standard, holding to a standard where you didn't really need to fire anybody. It didn't make sense that they were on the team. That guy ended up thriving and he became a regional sales manager, and he now runs the team that I used to run in Amsterdam. He's just a great sales rep and leader, but it's some of those early things need to be taught. We don't do those things.
Let me ask you this, and we can maybe wrap it up after this piece, but there's lots of thoughts on sales management and management principles in general. I typically believe praise in public, criticize in private.
Mhm.
Generally, you don't
Yeah,
want
and
to.
I agree with that. I
So,
mean, I was also like a 27-year-old first time at us
right,
learning the ways, but
but I think that is a rule that can be broken in the right circumstances. So I have some thoughts, but would you have done that given that scenario again? Would you do things any differently in the
I
moment?
mean, it
Would you
makes short
act?
stories. So in hindsight, he's happy where he is. I'm happy where I am. No, I would have done the same thing. Now, am I more mature and more wise? And maybe we wouldn't have even need to get to that point because I would have known what was happening earlier and
Right.
got him one-on-one in our one-on-ones and been like, hey, dude, listen, we're not tolerating that. I will fire you if you keep calling people who treat you poorly because it's not good for you and not good for the team. Mostly not good for you. No, but I mostly subscribe to that rule.
But obviously I wasn't there, but I think one of the reasons that made it okay for you to do it then and you could do the exact same thing again in the future is someone that's doing that is underperforming in some material way, right? And
He was
that
not over quota making that phone call. That's for
right,
sure.
exactly. And that underperformance is toxic, right? If people think that type of underperformance is tolerated, then your A players don't want to be there because they want to be around other really strong people. And what you were doing in that moment, I would say, is breaking the frame for him, but also letting it be known across the entire sales team that this is our standard. And my guess is that if you went back and talked to that rep, he's probably very thankful that he got called
Well,
out
he
in
was
that fashion.
he tells that story. He
Right.
remembers a little bit. I mean, he's not proud of it, but yeah.
But I also bet that if you ask the other people that were at or above quote at that time, what they thought about that story, they were probably pretty happy that you did it. And I think you can't do this all the time. That becomes a very toxic work culture pretty fast. But if you pick your spots properly, there's a time to drop F-bombs and really kind of break the
I mean,
normal
it's
frame.
firing the brilliant jerk, right? I mean, that's a philosophy of you don't tolerate that because it infects the culture, and you make an example of them publicly to say, "We're not gonna tolerate this behavior on our team," after you've let them go because you're not I mean, that's the point, right? And so, you do those things publicly as examples. So, I mean,
Yeah.
fortunately, he made him better, and he's a star, and he's a better salesman than I am, but it's like those that stuck with him.
Right. And it worked in the moment and the context always matters. But I think it was probably the right thing to do.
We also had
Yeah.
a very unique culture in that it was a wide open loft space in Soho. It was a dream, but there wasn't private space. So you had
Yeah.
to be very deliberate in your one-on-ones that were private. So it was a very public environment. Unfortunately, it was a very like trusting, healthy family feeling, I believe. And I mean, everybody's going to each other's weddings, so it's sustained. But also there was radical candor, which was also the culture. We wouldn't have had people on the team that couldn't be self-aware or be called out on things. And they teased me about many things that we can get into my roasting sessions and other podcasts. Too bad we're out of time.
Yeah, we're out of time for today, but this was a good quick episode. Appreciate you sharing those stories and
That
little
was fun.
lessons on keeping the standards high and making sure that you're calling people out when appropriate. Yeah. All right. See you guys later.